The consensus narrative depicts global conflict through the lens of launch-on warning protocols and hypersonic missile trajectories. This is a deliberate misdirection. The next systemic shock will not be a flash of light in the sky. It will be the opposite: absolute silence. The true vector of attack is not aimed at cities, but at the circulatory and nervous systems of the global economy, the thousands of miles of undersea fiber optic cables that carry 99% of all transcontinental data. This is the silent vector. Its kinetic cost is negligible. Its systemic leverage is total. This is not a theoretical threat. It is the baked-in survival protocol for states facing a mathematical certainty of insolvency. When a currency hyperinflates to 1.47 million per dollar, as seen in Iran, or when a state apparatus defaults on IMF payments like Egypt, the calculus of conventional power is abandoned. According to RUSI, these actors are actively gaming low-cost, high-impact scenarios. The objective is not to defeat the Leviathan of the global order, but to blind it. By severing key data arteries or executing satellite blinding operations, a financially weak actor triggers systemic paralysis. You disconnect the market from its data, the military from its command, the government from its currency. You create the blind Leviathan, a flailing, panicked superpower thrashing in an information blackout and manufacturing its own collapse. This is the blueprint for 21st century asymmetric escalation. The motive is not ideology. It is insolvency. When a nation-state's balance sheet collapses, its leadership enters a zero-sum survival protocol. The social contract is voided by debt. The choice becomes simple: internal collapse or external escalation. This is a solvency crisis expressed with kinetic force. Examine the Russian Federation. CSIS analysis confirms the invasion was preceded by immense domestic liability pressure. An unpopular war became a fiscal release valve. It was a balance sheet operation designed to convert a domestic financial crisis into a geopolitical asset, forcing a global repricing of energy and security. This is a systemic blueprint, not an isolated event. Look at the data points. In Iran, the currency imploded to 1.47 million rial per dollar, fueling internal uprising. In Egypt, the state missed IMF debt deadlines while its own military hoarded cash reserves greater than the nation's foreign debt. This is the terminal stage of conventional governance. The state apparatus cannibalizes itself before it pivots outward. Financial weakness forces a pivot to asymmetry. A state that cannot afford a fifth-generation fighter jet can afford thousands of explosive drones. The kinetic cost is low, but the strategic leverage is immense. The objective is not to win, but to create a crisis so entangled and expensive that solvent powers are forced to bail out the aggressor. It weaponizes the fragility of the global system against itself. The core of the new battlefield is not strategy, it is accounting. This is the math of asymmetric escalation. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, confirms the kinetic cost imbalance. On one side, a $5 million main battle tank. On the other, a $500 drone. For the price of one tank, a financially weak actor can deploy 10,000 armed drones. This is not a fair fight. It is an economic execution. The tank is no longer an asset. It is a $5 liability waiting to be liquidated by a weapon that costs less than a single tank shell. This phenomenon is clinically referred to as the democratization of violence. The barrier to entry for projecting lethal kinetic force has collapsed. A nation-state facing a solvency crisis does not need a modern air force to create a systemic crisis. It needs a shipping container of cheap electronics. This is the protocol for leveraging insolvency into global fragility. The global battlefield is no longer geographic. It is fiscal. Conflict is not being initiated between competing ideologies, but from a state of mathematical certainty. Insolvency. The new zones of conflict are not defined by borders, but by balance sheets. These are the gray zones. Proxy laboratories where new protocols for economic warfare are stress-tested before deployment. The blueprint is already operational. In Egypt, the government officially missed its IMF debt deadline. Simultaneously, Middle East Eye reported the Egyptian military was sequestering a secret cash reserve larger than the nation's total foreign debt. This is not institutional failure, it is a calculated decoupling. The core state apparatus preserves its own liquidity, jettisoning the civilian economic liability. It is a survival protocol. This vector accelerates under pressure. Iran's currency has hyperinflated past 1.4 million per dollar, effectively erasing its conventional economic power. According to CSIS analysis, when a state's financial solvency is eliminated, it defaults to an asymmetric launch-on-warning posture. The kinetic cost of deploying a low-tech weapon is negligible compared to the systemic leverage it creates against a fragile global economy. The mechanism is coldly efficient. Convert financial weakness into kinetic strength. A state that cannot afford a modern navy can afford to disrupt a shipping lane. This exploits the core liability of the West, an entire economic model built on debt and frictionless logistics. As financial analysts have warned regarding the Fed, Greenland's blunt warning to a superpower was not an outlier. It was a notification that the leverage has shifted. The insolvent now dictate terms to the illiquid. Therefore, incidents of regional instability, from internal warnings in Canada to unrest in South Africa, must be recontextualized. These are not the cause of systemic risk, they are symptoms. USI analysts designate these as proxy laboratories, where the solvency distress protocols are being field-tested. The predictable next step is not a direct superpower war, but an asymmetric kinetic event, launched from a bankrupt state, engineered specifically to trigger a liquidity crisis in the debt-fueled West. The launch-on-warning protocol is not a strategy. It is a mathematical trap. The doctrine dictates that a nation launches its nuclear arsenal upon detection of an incoming attack, before that attack lands and destroys its ability to retaliate. The entire system is built on trusting the signal. But the new vector of escalation is not a missile launch. It is a targeted cyber attack. Analysts at CSIS have modeled the fog of digital war, a scenario where an adversary doesn't attack a nation's arsenal, but its senses. The radar is blinded, the satellites are spoofed, the signal becomes a liability. In that moment, the commander is faced with a zero-sum choice based on corrupted data. The protocol demands a decision in minutes. To wait for confirmation is to risk total decapitation. To launch is to act on a potential ghost. Fear becomes the deciding variable. The protocol forces the launch out of fear of inaction. This asymmetric trigger is the new blueprint for leverage. As RUSI reports highlight, the actor most likely to deploy such a tactic is not a superpower, but a state facing a systemic solvency crisis. The kinetic cost of the cyber attack is near zero. The outcome? A global nuclear crisis grants the insolvent actor maximum leverage, forcing the world to negotiate with a gun to its head. This is the predictable endgame of a debt-fueled system. The protocol for state failure is no longer civil war, it is systemic attack. As a nation-state's solvency collapses, its behavior becomes mathematically predictable. We are not talking about theories. We are talking about ledgers. Iran's currency has crossed 1.4 million per dollar. Egypt, while its military holds reserves exceeding its foreign debt, defaulted on a $750 million IMF payment. This isn't mismanagement. It is the final stage of a debt-fueled economy transitioning to a new survival protocol. When conventional power becomes a liability, the insolvent actor must find leverage. They do not seek a fair fight. They seek a systemic choke point. According to CSIS analysis, the kinetic cost of disrupting a global node like an undersea data cable is infinitesimally small compared to the economic damage inflicted. The goal is not to win a war, but to create a crisis so expensive that the system is forced to negotiate on your terms. This is launch-on-warning economics. Therefore, the calibration shot is imminent. It will not be a missile, it will be a blackout. Within the next 12 months, expect a multi-day, attribution-impossible disruption of the CME-WE-4 or a similar class submarine communications cable in the Red Sea corridor. The event will be officially blamed on a dragging ship anchor or a minor seismic event. The true signal is a demonstration of capability, a kinetic short-selling of global stability by an actor with nothing left to lose.